Peace, everybody. I know that this is spare the moment, so I'm not surprised if not many of y'all are on here. I'll just pre-record what, or I'll just say what I have to say, and then you can always go back and look at it. So today's video was spare minute. I just came up with it literally 5-10 minutes, well, literally like 5 minutes ago. And it deals with looking at the history of the Bad Africa movement and how it applies today. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Please share these videos. We are approaching 800 subscribers. Let's get to 1,000. Let's try really hard to get to 1,000 by the end of the year. I know we can do it. So let's do that. So, like I said before, please share this video. The more people that share, please engage, please comment, please, in the chat and down below. That really allows this video to be shared. Make sure you're putting this on Instagram. We really want to get the message out here. So, to bring to today's topic, it is going to be talking about, as I mentioned before, looking back at the history of the Bad Africa movement and how it applies to today, because there's a lot of things we can learn from the past. Side note, I know that I was not there last Sunday. There was a lot going on last Sunday and in the last couple of weeks, which is why I have not been doing a lot of news videos on the Liberian presidential series, even though I said I would. There's just been a lot going on. My apologies. It's pretty hectic the last 2 weeks, but fortunately, I have a bit of a break, and I'm going to take every second of that to enjoy it. Hello, Fly Guy. So to get to the gist of it, the Back to Africa movement started as far back as the 1770s. Give me a minute. All right, y'all, I'm back. So what I was getting to, I was getting into the history of the Bad Africa movement. I've spoken about this before. We've done videos on why Liberia was an accomplishment, why Liberia being the nation state, and all that. But I'm gonna focus on the Bad Africa movement and more specifically the logistics of it, how it was done, what they were trying to do, and what are some of the mistakes that they made so that we can learn from them going forward. So, like I said before, the Bad African movement started in the 1770s, or there was references to the 1770s. There is speculation in the 1760s with Granville Town in Sierra Leone that led to the establishment of Freetown in 1787. So it started. We can confirmly say that the reference to the Bad Africa movement between the 1760s and 1770s. And it wasn't until after the American Revolutionary War that the Bad Africa movement, the first Bad Africa movement, really kicked off. So that was done through the British. So those who don't know, there were two sides to the American Revolution: Black loyalists and Black patriots. Although Black patriots were really small, it's speculated that between 20,000 Black loyalists fought for the British. That was nearly double who had fought for the Patriots. So majority of Black Americans were actually against the revolution than for the revolution. So, oh, was I on mute the whole time? Was I on mute the whole time? Oh, okay. So that's my bad. My bad, y'all. So the Bad Africa movement started, we can say confirmedly started in the 1770s, although there is speculation that it goes back into the 1760s. We're going to start officially confirmedly with the 1770s. And then the one with the speculation was with Granville Town that was founded in 1763, which was the same year as the proclamation of 1763, which was the gateway for the establishment of Freetown, Sierra Leone in 1787. But we can definitively say the 1770s at least. The first it started later in the 1780s. So of course you guys know from 1775 to 1783 to the Treaty of Paris, there was the American Revolutionary War, also known as the American Revolution or the War of Independence for the U.S. And at this time, 20,000 Black loyalists were fighting for the British because the British had made promises that if the slaves fought for them, they would get their freedom. And this was also with General Dunbar when he spoke to General Washington. So in the 1780s, the British were losing. Well, they were technically at a stalemate. They weren't technically losing. The only reason why the British stopped was because it was just not economically, financially feasible, and they had other endeavors they had to deal with, such as with France. So the British said, "All right, we're gonna grant you your independence in 1783." Although America took independence in 1776, it wasn't officially proclaimed as an independent nation until 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, and that was 2 years after the Battle of Yorktown had ended. So, of course, more Black Americans fought for the British than were against. It was about at least 20,000 to 10,000. That's nearly double. So these Black loyalists, of course, knowing that they were going to be persecuted, they were going to be facing pretty much death. The British sent the Black loyalists to Nova Scotia. Of course, in Nova Scotia, they struggled because it was cold. They were not getting paid fair wages. And as a result, it led to a man by the name of Thomas Peter basically going to England and basically stating that the Black loyalists would like somewhere they can call home. And that was going to be through what was known as the Sierra Leone Company, which would later be the colonial factor in colonizing Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone in 1787, like I said, with Thomas Peters, they then get the idea to establish a place called Freetown. Of course, Freetown, town of freed slaves or freed men. So in 1792, he and thousands of Black Nova Scotians, followed by hundreds of Jamaican Maroons and some Black Americans who were in the United States at the time, landed into what we call today what is Freetown, and it's in a small little bay or peninsula in Sierra Leone. That is the first major settlement. Then we go to the 1820s. We all know about that. I've talked about the history of Liberia, so I'm not going to go too in depth with that. But of course, they established Liberia. There's some tensions between the African Americans and some of the indigenous peoples. Wars break out. Eventually, Liberia gains its independence. Now we're going to be talking about how that was done. That was done through the American Colonization Society. The American Colonization Society was funded largely by philanthropists, although some of it was funded through the government. Most of it was funded through philanthropy, basically the benefit that basically white benefactors, that they would be kind-hearted to be willing to donate Black people money, and these Black people would have the resources to go to West Africa and establish their livelihoods. Then that was going to be, and that was a constant theme. If you look at most of the Black Americans who went there, even the Caribbean, most of it was either sponsored by their American Colonization Society or their country's respective colonization society. So the Barbados had their own, called the Barbadian Colonization Society. So that's how most of it was funded. And the last Black Americans to leave the country through the auspice of the American Colonization Society was in 1902, and in 1964 they turned the papers in. So we see here that most of it is state sponsored or through white benefactors. Peace, Lucy. How are you? So we see right here, it's benefacted, it's financed by white people and white benefactors, and that's partially why the Bad to Africa movement early wasn't popular. It wasn't the fact that majority of Black Americans necessarily opposed immigration, but the fact is that it's being led by white people, and there's a speculation among many free slaves that this is sort of there's an ulterior motive. He says Cheney University, oldest HBCU, 1837, was called the African Institute. Amazingly, in the 18th century, we were known as African people, but today some blacks call themselves ADOS or Indians. It's revisionist history. It's one of those things that a huge problem with the internet and social media is is giving people platforms that don't need to be having platforms. Lucy, quick side note: if you can go to Liberia beforehand, please, if you can, please do, because I don't know if you've been update, but basically there's something going down in December. Unfortunately, I can't go because I'm really trying to save to the spring. But if you can go, that'd be really appreciated, because I know you're in Ghana, and in Ghana is not too far from Liberia. So if you can, please stop by, please, because we would really appreciate your presence there. Because it's gonna be the kickoff of the Liberian Bicentennial that will start from December of this year to the end of next year. So yeah. It started in like, well, if you can plan, I know it might be a little bit too close, but it's like December 20th or December 13th. It's 2 months out. It's 2 months out from now. December is when they kick off. It's Liberia Year of the Diaspora, and it's in yeah, mid-December. Yeah, mid-December, Lucy. I just wanted to get that out there because I know you're here, and I really wanted to get you up to speed with that. So continue to address Baruti's point. Yeah, people getting platforms that don't deserve to get platforms. I mean, calling themselves, I don't understand where that comes from, but well, actually, we can get into this because this does relate to the Bad Africa movement. So you did have in the early days those who opposed the Bad Africa movement saying, like the ADOS movement, we're Americans, you know, our place is here. All right, appreciate it so much, Lucy. Appreciate it. So Baruti, actually, this goes into the history of the Bad Africa movement to a certain degree. You have a situation where there are some Black Americans who are like, "Hey, we're Americans. You know, we ain't African. Why would we go to Africa and all of this?" Basically, the same classic, giving Africa negative vibes and basically talking trash about Africa. So that was one of the oppositions, but one of the things that the opposition made, I mean, the pros made, the people who were advocating for immigration, is what we've been advocating right now. And this is why I said, looking back at the Bad Africa movement to really understand, how we can move forward today. So one of the examples that they made was okay, you're making the argument and claim that we are Americans, yet we're not being treated as Americans. We oftentimes are disenfranchised from voting. We we're not citizens. We're not legally citizens. So on one token, you're telling Black people in America, similar to what the ADOS movement Baruti says today, we're Americans, we're indigenous to America, this is our home. And the points that we're making today was the exact same points they were making in 200 years ago, 200 years ago, 240 years ago to be exact. You don't have a say in much in the politics. Voting is not helping you. Okay? Property rights. You getting your hair done. Okay, okay. I get it. Jabbar, are you suggesting that if the 18th century blacks in U.S. colonies didn't suspect a trick and white-led bad Afro movement, they would have supported African creation? Yes, that's exactly what would have happened. Yes, we have definitive evidence of this. That it was opposition to the American Colonization Society, not the idea of a Back to Africa movement. Because an example would be James Forten, and I've talked about him. James Forten was very supportive of the Back to Africa movement until the American Colonization Society got involved. We have a direct correlation pre-slavery that African Americans supported Back to Africa largely if it was black led. That's the reason why Garvey was popular. That's the reason why Henry McNeil Turner was popular. That's the reason why Delaney was popular. That's the reason why Paul Cuffey was popular. They were popular because they advocated black independence, but these were black led movements. These were not movements that were being led by slaveholders where you could ask, what's the ulterior motive? Because there were slaveholders who wanted to remove free black people because they thought it would help entrench slavery. That was one aspect. The other one was to Christianize Africa. So you see, with these white benefactors, there's different motives than just, oh, we're sending black people there because we believe black people need to connect with their roots and they need to be there. You see, there's an ulterior motive with the American Colonization Society. Now, I do need to make note of this. I do need to make note that what I said right or just a minute ago, that was pre-emancipation. That was pre 1865. Now let's get to post 1865 or the emancipation after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War had ended, and the passage of these amendments. The American Colonization Society now has a completely different function. Lucy said, hence this fake trick bag year of return. Yeah, they're like you have to ask the ulterior motive. That's why I said I don't mind African governments doing something for the diaspora, but it needs to be diaspora led. And I know some people say, well, why don't African governments, take the lead? They have their own motives as well. So it needs to be diaspora led. This is why we say organized boots on the ground. It needs to be led by us. So we know what we're getting and what we want. And that's going to go into the post-emancipation. And post-emancipation, we're heading into Reconstruction. This is the 1870s, 1880s. So now we've reached a point to where the American Colonization Society pre-1865 is debunked because now slavery is over. So now that slavery is over, what exactly are we returning to? That can be interpreted in many different ways, Hollow. I can be honest. That could be interpreted in just so many ways. What are we returning to? So after the American, what was it? Not the yeah. So after we've been freed, well, the American Colonization Society of entrenched slavery is no longer there, but the American Colonization Society, like I said, was the avenue to which most black people were able to leave. That's how most black people in Liberia were able to go because of the American Colonization Society. Even after slavery, the primary mode of getting back to Africa was the American Colonization Society. I mean, you did have African immigration societies, such as the African Jubilee Immigration Society, the African Civilization Society, Henry McNeil's civil societies, immigration societies, pardon me, Benjamin Singleton's United Transatlantic Society. You've had all of these immigration societies, but they didn't have the money or the backing as the we so they didn't have the money, and oftentimes they went out of business. So when people tell you that the Bad African Women was a failure, because no, it's not. It was a failure because black people didn't want to go. It's they didn't have the money. They didn't have the resources. So you have a situation where, like I said, all of these black-led movements are rising up to create a black immigration movement, and they were never able to succeed because they didn't have the financing. Even the American Colonization Society that sent those black Americans, it was like 200 or 300. I mean, that was good, but it's dwarfed compared to the 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 African Americans that wanted to leave during that time period, who wrote letters. I mean, the American Colonization Society was overwhelmed by these letters. And so this brings it to today. You have to, while we talk about organization, we talk about money, we talk about capital. Yeah, he said Richard Allen, AME Church 1787 founder, did not eschew African repatriation. He did believe that repatriating Africans could be recaptured in Africa or on the high seas and resold. That was a concern. And see, I'm glad that you bring that up, because that's one of the things that when people talk about Liberia, they forget about. Like, people act like black Americans was just gonna go into Africa and it was gonna be dancing and unicorns, and we all just celebrate, we all just fam. It's like, nah, these ethnic groups have their own interests too. And they were still selling slaves, and you would be 16 shot, they would have sold you right back, and you'll be back in America on a plantation. Despite the fact that you was literally just on the plantation. And as a matter of fact, I think that did happen, where a slave was who repatriated back to Africa was kidnapped and sold into slavery. So don't this rosiness of we go there, it's going to be unicorns, not understanding interest and understanding what power is, and that just it rubs me the wrong way. But you make a great point. Holland said, we lost our nationality and our self-governance. Are we getting that back when we return? No. I think what a lot of people see us returning back to Africa is just completely assimilating into an ethnic group. So African Americans go to Nigeria and they get completely reassimilated into Igbo society. So we're Igbos. We're ethnically Igbos. That's who we are. We're ethnically Yoruba. We're ethnically Ewe. We're ethnically Akan. We're ethnically Kru, Basa, whatever. Whatever ethnic groups in Angola. That's who we are. Not to be self-governing, having our own nation, is really just assimilating us back as individuals back in Africa. So that's really where it comes. What most people have the idea of us going back to Africa, and being completely absorbed into the their African society, to where you can argue African Americans don't exist. Until Africans don't exist. That's just let's just call it what it is. So I so now some people would be questioning, well, why did we go through all of that history? All of that history. Because you have to look at the history to understand how to look into the future and what to anticipate. So now that, like I said, I've given you the information, the avenues that they were doing that was government led, American Colonization Society, black led organizations were the major ones that had grassroots support but didn't have the finances. Why do I bring that up? Because look at today. Today you got plenty of black Americans that want to go back. But you don't have a grassroots movement. You don't have a grassroots movement. You don't have a grassroots organization, and it's not financially sustainable. You're not giving any services or products, and as a result, we see the craziness going on today in the continent. Sometimes between African repatriates and the continental Africans or the local Africans who are living there. This all comes down to organizing. It all comes down to having a vision and having things in place. When I was watching Jai Essence, and if you have not watched her videos, please subscribe. She's in Rwanda. I know our BAIO family's been in Rwanda, so I think they'll be pretty adept to speak on it. But Jai Essence, I think, or it's J Essence. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing it J or Jai. Jai. I just it's spelled J-I, so I assume it's Jai, but it could be J. Sorry if I'm not sure what the pronunciation is. But she said, "Are you leaving America or are you going back to Africa?" And she made this point because she was talking about when you get up and leave, you have to do research, you have to plan, you have to have everything in line. And that's when we look at these bad African movements, what we need to remember. Most of them were organized, most of them had grassroots support, they just didn't have the finances. Let's look at today. There is grassroots support. People can finance themselves over there. Although it would be nice to have a group over there, but they can finance themselves. Those are two things that back in the past would have virtually been impossible because, of course, getting a ship back in the day was really expensive. And like I said, you had to be really, really wealthy, like Paul Cuffey, EJ Roy type wealth. Like you had to be the richest of the richest black people to even afford to to have your own ship and be able to go back and forth like that. So we have those situations, right? And between today. However, what we don't have is organization. That's what we don't have. You have Africans repatriating to the continent by themselves, and they might get disappointed because they didn't plan properly, but also you didn't go as a group and there's no support system. And we keep bringing this up. We've said this constantly over and over and over and over and over again about going Han Solo and how going Han Solo doesn't work. You have to understand that if you're trying to indicate a mass movement, like the Garveys, the Turners, the Delaney's, if we want that mass movement, it's got to be organized, it's got to be smooth, it's got to be flowing. Okay. When an African American gets on that continent, and this is one thing that back in the day they had. If you look at the UNIA and you look at the UNIA auxiliaries, they had UNIA Black Cross nurses, they had the Corps, they had the African Legion. Okay. They had auxiliaries. When you look at the American colonization side, they had doctors, they had lawyers, they had merchants. These were just not just random people that get together, they were organized. They had skills, they had capital. And that's important because when I head over to Africa as somebody or Liberia, I need people who already are established. I need the people to provide me jobs. Okay. I need the people to help me get acclimatized to the politics there. I need people to help me fill out my immigration papers. Whereas all I got to do is show up to Liberia, and there's an African American organization side that deals with immigration papers, that deals with working with the government so that all my paperwork gets settled and I don't have to do all of this running around. Okay. Like I said earlier, there are jobs to where if I'm an African American and I'm an electrical engineer, I can work at an electrical company and be doing electrical projects with power grids, renewable energy, circuits, computers. That has to be in there whenever you're thinking about these movements on a mass scale. Because during the Garvey movement in the UNA, and I'm going to go further into the Garvey movement because I feel like that really needs to be talked about more, was you had the Black Star Line, you had the Negro Factories Corporation. They were providing for their people, not just Like, hey, we going better, but they were providing, they were building factories, they were trying to get their people to work. They wanted to run a nation. When Garvey sent his delegation, that included Henrietta Benton Davis. It included people that were engineers, who were surveyors. These were not random people who just pulled up, but they were part of an organized movement. They were the delegation. That means that was their duty. They were in the international affairs, and that what is something that's missing today. People don't have a duty. He says to Howell's point about regaining of identity, African Americans should identify a group name before we leave the U.S. and identify as that upon arriving. African spaces like Mumbumba, many villages in Swahili. Mabumba people, in my view, can live in Liberia, Rwanda, and other African countries as an ethnic group. Mabomba, as well as nationality of the country which is being resided in. Yeah, I think that would be dope. I would think like Sankofa or Sundiata or Mamalu. There's so many names you can name. So we would just have to figure out which one really grabs the people's attention. But to further elaborate, you have to have that. Um, So that's really one of the things you gotta think about. Like, it has to be smooth, it has to be flowing, it has to be organized. And that's what today's current Bad Africa movement is completely missing. Like I said, we have the finances today because now we can actually afford to move out the country if we wanted to, if we were organized. We can actually afford to move out the country because many Black Americans do have, to a certain degree, some finances or some degree of where if they really say that they can move. And they're Black led. I mean, they're popular support. There's popular support. We hear it. We saw it with the Ghana video by CBS. People in the comment section, Black Americans were ripping CBS for showing negative images about the Black Americans moving to Ghana, how they were showing the slums. They were also talking about how going back to Africa is no longer seen as an insult, but instead something to look for. You know, so there is popular support and a recognition that there's nothing wrong with returning back to the continent. However, we need to remember that other aspect, which is organizing. It's organized, it's smooth, it's free flowing. That's really what needs to be reminded. People should not be having to when African Americans ask questions like how do I get immigration papers? What's the process? An African American organization like the African American, like the Liberian African American Association. I'm just gonna make that up. The L, which would be like read the LAAA or the UNIA. You can get on the phone or you can email them and they can guide you through the steps. And when they get the papers, they're able to speak to the government. They're able to get you your visa. They're able to get you all of that without you having to do more work. It should be. I understand that we want people to be involved, and yes, people are going to be involved, and we need people to be involved. But the key thing is, as leaders and orchestrators of the movement, it should not be difficult for the average person who is not deeply involved in politics, who may consider, hey, I want to try out this Bad Africa movement. It shouldn't be hard for them to be able to get into the movement and be able to do stuff and contribute. It shouldn't be that hard. I know that there are some people like, well, what are you doing and stuff like that, but it shouldn't be that difficult for people in the average society because we are the leaders, we're the orchestrators, we're the illustrators. Therefore, we're the ones who are selling the vision. It is up to the people who are selling the vision to give the people something to follow and something to do and something to contribute. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. This is not going to be a really long live stream. I'm not going to be talking for an hour. I just don't find it necessary. So those are the points that I wanted to bring up: the Bad African movement and what to look for today. Understanding that the difference between back in the day was primarily white led. It was led by white benefactors. There were ulterior motives, and today's movement, they have popular support. People do have the finances. They just don't. They're not organized compared to in the past where they were black led and they were organized. It's just that they didn't necessarily have the finances, and as a result, thousands of African Americans never got their dream to go back to Liberia. So to consider that when we talk about the Bad Africa movement and also the talking points of the Bad Africa movement, that majority of them opposed it, when in reality they really were opposed to the American colonization society, the white slaveholders, and the white ulterior motives, not so much the idea of returning back to Africa and having our own nation state and, really sort of having our own self-determination. And I'm going to be going into the Garvey movement in the Liberian presidential series and elaborating on that. So remember to like, share, and subscribe. Make sure to engage. Once again, I was really busy the last couple weeks, so that's why I didn't do a live stream last Sunday, and I haven't been doing Liberian presidential series videos. But now that I have a break, I got more time, so I'll be able to hopefully pump out more videos. He says, I think having a Rolls Royce is more important than what name I call it, in my honest opinion. Yeah, true. It doesn't really matter what you call it as long as you have it and you have the power to dictate it. And once again, it's yours. So once again, make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment below. Make sure you engage. Tell us what you think. Share this with your friends and family. And of course, I'll see you back in the next video. Peace, fam.